I never thought the weapon I'd trained with for months would become the thing I feared most on the battlefield. My name is Private First Class Michael Hayes, and in the spring of 1965, I was a 20-year-old infantryman with the 1st Cavalry Division deployed to Vietnam. I'd grown up in rural Pennsylvania, spent countless hours hunting deer in the mountains with my father's old Winchester, and considered myself a decent shot. The Army had issued me the brand new M16 rifle during training at Fort Benning, Georgia, telling us it was the most advanced infantry weapon in the world. Lightweight, high velocity, deadly accurate. They said it would give us a decisive advantage against enemy forces. What they didn't tell us, what nobody knew yet, was that this revolutionary rifle had a fatal flaw that would cost American lives and shatter our confidence in the very equipment we depended on to survive. The morning of June 8, 1965, started with the oppressive heat and humidity that defined the central highlands of Vietnam. Our company, Charlie Company of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, was conducting search and destroy operations near the Ia Drang Valley. The vegetation was dense jungle, the kind where you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction, where every shadow could hide an enemy soldier, and where the distinction between safety and death was measured in split seconds of reaction time. I was carrying my M16, cleaning kit, ammunition, water, rations, and all the other gear that made each step through the mud feel like walking through concrete. My platoon leader, 2nd Lieutenant James Davidson, was 23 years old, fresh out of officer candidate school, eager to prove himself but carrying the same uncertainty we all felt about this strange war in a strange country. Davidson had been with us for 6 weeks, long enough to learn our names and earn a basic level of respect, but not long enough to have faced serious combat. That was about to change for all of us. We'd been humping through the jungle since 600 hours, following a trail that intelligence suggested was being used by North Vietnamese Army units moving supplies south. The point man, Specialist Rodriguez from Texas, suddenly raised his fist in the universal signal to halt. The entire platoon froze, weapons coming up, safeties clicking off, every sense straining for any indication of what Rodriguez had detected. Then the world exploded into violence. The ambush came from 3 sides simultaneously. A classic L-shaped kill zone that caught us perfectly. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire ripped through the jungle, rounds snapping through the air with that terrifying sound that every combat soldier learns to recognize instantly. Rodriguez went down in the first seconds, hit multiple times. The rest of us dove for whatever cover we could find, returning fire as we'd been trained. I rolled behind a fallen log, brought my M16 up and squeezed the trigger at a muzzle flash I'd spotted about 30 meters to my left front. The rifle fired once, twice, 3 times, and then jammed. The bolt locked back, but there was clearly a round still in the chamber. I executed the immediate action drill we'd practiced countless times, tapped the magazine to ensure it was seated, racked the charging handle to clear the obstruction, and attempt to fire again. Nothing happened. The rifle was completely dead. Around me, the firefight was intensifying. I could hear Lieutenant Davidson shouting orders, hear other soldiers returning fire, hear the wounded crying out for medics. But my weapon, the piece of equipment that stood between me and death, was useless. I frantically worked the charging handle again, and this time when I pulled it back, I saw the problem. The spent cartridge case was stuck in the chamber, the brass swollen and impossible to extract with just the charging handle. "Hayes, lay down fire on that position," Davidson screamed from somewhere to my right. "My weapon's jammed, sir," I shouted back, feeling a surge of panic that threatened to overwhelm me. I was in combat in a kill zone, and my rifle had failed after firing exactly 3 rounds. I grabbed the cleaning rod from my pack, a procedure we'd been taught for clearing stuck cases, but doing it under fire while rounds were impacting all around me was something entirely different from the calm of a training range. My hands were shaking, sweat was pouring into my eyes, and every second I spent trying to fix my weapon was a second I wasn't fighting back against an enemy who was trying very hard to kill me. I finally got the stuck case cleared and attempted to fire again. This time I got 5 rounds off before the rifle jammed again in exactly the same way. Another stuck case, another frantic clearing procedure while bullets snapped overhead and tore through the vegetation around me. But here's what made it truly nightmarish. I wasn't the only one. All around me I could hear other soldiers shouting about jammed weapons, could see them frantically working to clear malfunctions while the enemy continued to pour fire into our position. Sergeant Miller, our squad leader with 2 tours in Vietnam under his belt, was screaming profanity as his M16 failed him at the worst possible moment. Corporal Jackson, one of our best shots, had given up on his rifle entirely and was throwing grenades because at least those worked. The firefight lasted about 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. We eventually forced the enemy to break contact, not through superior firepower, but through sheer determination and the support of our machine gunners, whose M60s, thank God, functioned reliably. When the shooting finally stopped and we could assess the situation, the results were devastating. Rodriguez was dead. 3 other soldiers were seriously wounded. And out of the 32 M16 rifles in our platoon, 26 had experienced malfunctions serious enough to require immediate attention before they could be fired again. Lieutenant Davidson was furious in a way I'd never seen him before. His face was red, his voice was shaking, and his hands were clenched into fists as he confronted our company commander on the radio. "Sir, this is unacceptable. We just got caught in an ambush and half my platoon's weapons failed. Men died because their rifles jammed. I want answers, and I want them now." The response came back with bureaucratic calm that only made Davidson angrier. The company commander acknowledged the problem, said he'd forward the complaints up the chain of command, and told us to continue the mission. Continue the mission. With weapons we couldn't trust. With rifles that might fire 3 rounds or 30 before failing. With equipment that had betrayed us when we needed it most. That night, as we set up a defensive perimeter in a small clearing, the entire platoon spent hours trying to understand what had gone wrong. We field-stripped our M16s, cleaned every component meticulously, checked for obvious defects or damage. The rifles looked fine. The problem wasn't visible wear or broken parts. Something more fundamental was wrong, and none of us had the technical knowledge to figure out what. Sergeant Miller, who'd carried an M14 rifle during his first tour before the switch to the M16, was the most vocal about the problem. "Back in '63, we had rifles that worked," he said, his voice bitter. "They were heavy, they kicked like a mule, but they fired every single time you pulled the trigger. Now we've got these lightweight plastic pieces of garbage that jam after 5 rounds. Whoever decided to issue these things needs to spend a day in the jungle with Charlie shooting at them." Private Tommy Chen from California, always the one trying to find logical explanations, offered his theory. "Maybe it's the jungle environment? The humidity, the mud, the dust? These rifles were probably designed for temperate climates, not tropical jungle." "The AK-47 works fine in the jungle," someone shot back. "Charlie uses the same rifles in the same environment, and they don't jam." That comparison stung because it was absolutely true. The enemy's primary weapon, the Soviet-designed AK-47, was crude by American standards. It was less accurate, fired a less powerful round, and lacked the sophisticated engineering of the M16. But it worked. In mud, in dust, in rain, in any condition imaginable, the AK-47 functioned reliably. Our advanced American rifle, with all its technological superiority, was failing at the most basic requirement of any weapon. It needed to go bang when you pulled the trigger. Over the next several weeks, the pattern continued. Every firefight, every engagement, multiple M16s would jam. Soldiers developed elaborate cleaning rituals, spending hours every day maintaining their rifles to a standard that would have impressed any drill sergeant. It didn't help. The rifles still jammed with horrifying regularity. Some guys started carrying extra cleaning rods and even small bottles of oil, preparing for the inevitable malfunctions. Others began picking up AK-47s from dead enemy soldiers, preferring the reliability of captured enemy weapons to the unreliability of their issued American rifles. The psychological impact was devastating. Combat is terrifying enough when you trust your equipment. When you don't trust your weapon, when you know there's a significant chance it will fail you at the critical moment, the fear multiplies exponentially. Every time we left our base on patrol, every time we moved through areas where contact was likely, every soldier carrying an M16 had the same gnawing anxiety in his gut. Will my rifle work when I need it? Will I pull the trigger and hear a click instead of a bang? Will I die because my weapon failed me? I started keeping a journal during those months, something I'd never done before. Writing helped me process the fear and frustration. One entry from July 1965 captured the mood perfectly. Today we went on patrol expecting contact. I spent the entire time thinking about my rifle jamming instead of thinking about the mission. That's backwards. I should trust my weapon completely so I can focus on the enemy. Instead, I'm afraid of my own equipment. How are we supposed to win a war when we can't trust our guns? The fear wasn't abstract or theoretical. It was based on repeated, consistent experience. Private Danny Wilson from Ohio got pinned down by a sniper in August. His M16 jammed on the second shot. He spent 15 minutes behind inadequate cover, unable to return fire, while the rest of the squad tried to locate and suppress the sniper. When we finally got him out, Wilson was shaking so badly he could barely walk. "I thought I was dead," he said later. "I had a weapon, I had ammunition, but I couldn't shoot back. I was completely helpless." That sense of helplessness was corrosive. We were trained to be aggressive, to take the fight to the enemy, to dominate the battlefield through superior firepower and tactics. But you can't be aggressive when you don't know if your weapon will function. You become cautious, defensive, hesitant, and in combat, hesitation kills. Letters started flowing home to families, and those families started writing their congressmen. Newspaper reporters embedded with units began filing stories about the rifle malfunctions. By late 1965, the M16 reliability issue was becoming a national scandal. The Army initially responded with denials and defensive statements. The rifle was fine, they said. Soldiers weren't cleaning them properly. The maintenance procedures needed to be followed more carefully. It was user error, not equipment failure, but those of us in the field knew better. We were cleaning our rifles constantly, following every procedure, doing everything we'd been taught. The problem wasn't us. The problem was the rifle itself, though it would be months before the full scope of the technical failures became public knowledge. In October 1965, I was part of a unit that participated in a major engagement near Play Me. During the height of the fighting, my squad was tasked with holding a critical position against a North Vietnamese assault. We had 8 soldiers with M16s and 1 M60 machine gun. Within the first 5 minutes of heavy fighting, 6 of the 8 M16s had jammed. The only thing that saved us from being overrun was the M60, which fired continuously for nearly 10 minutes while the riflemen frantically worked to clear their weapons. After that battle, I made a decision that technically violated regulations, but probably saved my life. I took an AK-47 from a dead enemy soldier and carried it as my primary weapon, keeping my M16 as a backup. I wasn't the only one. Across Vietnam, American soldiers were increasingly relying on captured enemy weapons because they couldn't trust their own. The absurdity and tragedy of that situation cannot be overstated. Here we were, soldiers of the most technologically advanced military in human history, fighting with captured enemy weapons because our own equipment was unreliable. It was humiliating, demoralizing, and absolutely infuriating. The breaking point came in early 1967 when congressional hearings were held to investigate the M16 failures. It emerged that the problems were multifaceted and rooted in decisions made years before at the highest levels of military procurement. The rifle had been designed to use a specific type of powder in its ammunition, but the Army had switched to a different powder that produced more fouling and higher pressure, causing the extraction failures we'd experienced. The rifle had been designed with a chrome-lined chamber to prevent corrosion, but that feature had been eliminated to save costs. The rifle had been marketed as requiring minimal maintenance, leading to inadequate cleaning kits being issued and insufficient training on proper care. In other words, every level of the system had failed. The designers had created a rifle that required specific conditions to function reliably. The procurement officers had made changes that compromised reliability to save money. The training system had failed to prepare soldiers for the weapon's actual maintenance requirements, and combat soldiers had paid the price in blood. What made the situation even more painful was learning about the internal debates that had preceded the M16's adoption. Documents that came out during the congressional hearings revealed that some military officials had raised concerns about reliability during testing. These concerns had been dismissed or downplayed by officers who were committed to adopting the new rifle for reasons that had more to do with bureaucratic politics than battlefield effectiveness. The decision to change the ammunition powder, despite warnings from the rifle's original designers, had been made to benefit specific manufacturers. The elimination of chrome-lined chambers had been justified as a cost-saving measure, even though the savings amounted to just a few dollars per rifle. Reading about these decisions years later, understanding that men had died because someone wanted to save $3 on manufacturing costs, or because an officer didn't want to admit that his preferred rifle design had problems, filled me with a rage that took decades to process. These weren't abstract policy debates. These were life and death decisions, and the people making them had prioritized everything except the lives of the soldiers who would carry these rifles into combat. Sergeant Miller didn't make it home to see those congressional hearings. He was killed in March 1967 during a firefight when his M16 jammed at the critical moment. He was trying to clear the malfunction when enemy fire cut him down. A soldier with 12 years of experience, 2 tours in Vietnam, a Bronze Star for valor, killed because his rifle failed him. At his memorial service, Lieutenant Davidson, now a first lieutenant with a combat infantryman badge and his own collection of scars, gave a speech that was equal parts eulogy and indictment. Sergeant Miller survived 2 tours in this war, Davidson said, his voice tight with emotion. He survived ambushes, mortar attacks, patrols through enemy territory. He was one of the best soldiers I've ever known, and he died because the rifle his country gave him didn't work when he needed it most. That's not just a tragedy, that's a betrayal. The improvements started coming in late 1967 and into 1968. New ammunition with the proper powder, chrome-lined chambers, better cleaning kits, revised maintenance procedures, training that actually reflected the weapon's real requirements rather than the manufacturer's optimistic marketing. The M16A1, as the improved version was designated, was dramatically more reliable than the original M16, but the improvements came too late for Sergeant Miller and hundreds of other soldiers who died fighting with weapons that betrayed them. I completed my tour in Vietnam in March 1968 and returned home to Pennsylvania. I'd been in country for nearly 3 years, participating in dozens of firefights, earning a Purple Heart for wounds received when shrapnel from a mortar round caught me in the leg. But the physical wounds healed faster than the psychological damage from those early months when we couldn't trust our weapons. For years afterward, I had nightmares about pulling the trigger and hearing nothing, about being in combat with a useless piece of metal and plastic while the enemy closed in. Other veterans I talked to described similar dreams, similar anxieties. The M16 reliability issue had created a form of trauma that was distinct from the usual combat stress. It wasn't just fear of being shot or killed, it was the visceral, gut-level understanding that the very equipment we depended on could fail us at any moment. Returning to civilian life was challenging for many reasons, but one of the strangest was encountering people who had opinions about the M16 based on news reports or political positions rather than actual experience. Some people insisted the rifle was fine and that complaints were overblown. Others used the M16 failures as evidence that the entire war effort was flawed. Very few people understood the nuanced reality. The rifle had serious problems that cost lives. Those problems were eventually fixed, and the whole situation represented a systemic failure at multiple levels of military procurement and leadership. I struggled to find work initially after returning home. The Pennsylvania economy was changing, manufacturing jobs were becoming scarce, and being a combat veteran wasn't always viewed positively in the late 1960s. I eventually found work as a machinist, which suited me. Working with precision tools and machinery was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. There was something satisfying about creating things that worked exactly as they were supposed to, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, with quality control that ensured reliability. In the decades since Vietnam, the M16 and its derivatives have been refined into highly reliable weapons. The M16A2, M16A4, and M4 carbine used by American forces today are among the most dependable infantry rifles in the world. The early problems have been solved through better manufacturing, better quality control, better training, and honest acknowledgement of the weapon's actual requirements, rather than wishful thinking about how it should perform. Modern soldiers I've talked to at veterans events sometimes express surprise when I tell them about the early M16 failures. They know the weapon as reliable, accurate, and effective. The idea that there was a time when American infantry couldn't trust their primary weapon seems almost unbelievable to them. But it happened, and the lessons from that experience remain relevant. But that doesn't change what happened in 1965, 1966, and 1967. It doesn't bring back Sergeant Miller or the other soldiers who died with jammed rifles in their hands. It doesn't erase the psychological scars of fighting with equipment you couldn't trust, and it stands as a permanent reminder of what happens when military procurement decisions are made based on cost savings and optimistic assumptions rather than the harsh realities of combat. I'm 79 years old now, and I still think about that morning in June 1965 when my M16 jammed after 3 rounds while enemy fire ripped through the jungle around me. I think about the panic, the fear, the desperate realization that the weapon I'd been issued to keep me alive was instead putting my life at greater risk. I think about how we'd been told the M16 was the most advanced rifle in the world, and how that promise had turned into a nightmare when we needed it most. The lesson from that experience extends far beyond the specific technical failures of one rifle. It's about the fundamental contract between a military and its soldiers. When you send men and women into combat, you owe them equipment that works, leadership that's honest about that equipment's capabilities and limitations, and a willingness to fix problems quickly when they emerge rather than denying their existence to protect careers and reputations. That contract was broken in Vietnam with the M16. Soldiers paid for that betrayal with their lives, their injuries, and their psychological trauma. The fact that the problems were eventually fixed doesn't change the fundamental failure, and the responsibility for that failure rests not with the soldiers who carried those rifles, but with the officers, procurement officials, and political leaders who prioritized everything except the reliability of the equipment on which soldiers' lives depended. Tommy Chen, who'd offered his theory about jungle conditions that night after the first ambush, survived Vietnam and became an engineer. Years later, over beers at a veterans reunion, he told me something I've never forgotten. "You know what the worst part was," he said. "It wasn't even the jamming. It was the realization that the people making decisions about our equipment had never considered whether it would actually work in the conditions where we'd use it. They'd designed a rifle for a theoretical battlefield, not the real one, and we paid the price for their failure to understand that distinction." He was right. The American gun that became our worst nightmare wasn't ultimately about technical specifications or engineering failures. It was about a system that had lost sight of its primary purpose, keeping soldiers alive and giving them the tools to accomplish their mission. When that purpose was subordinated to other considerations, whether cost savings, procurement politics, or simple institutional arrogance, the result was predictable and tragic. My name is Michael Hayes, and I was 20 years old when I learned that the most dangerous thing on a battlefield isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the weapon in your own hands, when that weapon has been issued to you by people who didn't ensure it would work when you needed it most. That's a lesson I've carried for more than 50 years, and it's one that every generation of military leaders needs to learn and remember. Because the alternative is measured in flag-draped coffins and shattered lives, in soldiers who died not because they weren't brave enough or skilled enough, but because the equipment they were given simply didn't work.